I noticed the gate for the first time on a morning when the city felt unusually heavy, as though even the air was carrying something it didn't want to share. The iron was old, blackened with age, vines creeping up its bars like fingers clinging to secrets. I had walked past it dozens of times, always assuming it led to some abandoned courtyard. But that day, the light caught it differently. The sun poured through in such a way that the lock glimmered, drawing my eye. It wasn't just a gate, it was a question. I slowed my steps, coffee warm in my hand, and looked closer. The lock itself was rusted, yes, but firm. A padlock that had been closed so long it felt almost like part of the metal. The vines made it nearly invisible from the sidewalk. And perhaps that was the point. It wasn't meant to be found. Yet something about it stirred me. That week had been draining. Work piled up, deadlines circled me like vultures, and every conversation with my family felt like a subtle interrogation. When would I settle? When would I choose stability? When would I stop drifting? I smiled, I deflected, but inside I felt thin, as though something in me had been worn down by too many questions without answers. So when I saw the gate, I stopped. I even pressed my palm against the iron, cold seeping into my skin. For a moment, I imagined it opening, revealing something wild, something untouched by time. The thought embarrassed me. What was I hoping for? A secret world waiting to save me? Still, as I turned away and continued down the street, I couldn't shake the image. That night, while brushing my teeth, I caught myself wondering, who locked it and why? Days passed, but the gate followed me like a song half remembered. I found myself taking detours just to walk past it. Always locked, always silent, vines pulling tighter around its shape as if it wanted to vanish. Then, one Saturday morning, everything changed. The air was warm for early spring, the kind of warmth that tricks you into leaving your scarf at home. I walked past with no intention of stopping, but something tugged at me. The lock was gone. Not broken, gone. The gate stood slightly ajar, a crack wide enough to reveal a whisper of green beyond, a place the city had no business hiding. I froze, pulse in my throat. My first thought was that someone must live there, that I would be trespassing, but the silence told a different story. No voices, no footsteps, no hum of electricity. Just a strange stillness, as if the space beyond had been waiting. I glanced around. People bustled down the street, cars hissed past puddles left by last night's rain, but no one else seemed to notice the open gate. It was as if it had opened only for me. I don't know what pushed me forward, boredom, curiosity, or that restless ache inside me, but I slipped through the narrow opening. On the other side, the air changed. It smelled of damp earth and blossoms, though nothing should have been blooming yet. The city's noise dulled, replaced by the low murmur of wind through branches, and there before me was a garden. Wild, alive, impossible. Flowers stretched in colors I hadn't seen in years. Roses heavy with dew, tulips standing proudly beside violets, a chaos of seasons colliding at once. Trees arched overhead, their leaves scattering sunlight like shattered glass. And in the center, a stone bench set, waiting, as though someone had known I would come. My hand brushed a rose petal, soft and trembling, and I whispered to myself, how can this exist here? Behind me, the gate closed, with a sound softer than breath. The garden didn't feel like it belonged to the city. It was as though I had slipped out of one world and into another, one stitched together from fragments of every season I had ever loved. Birdsong drifted from somewhere unseen, delicate and almost tentative, as if even the birds were surprised to be here. I walked slowly, careful not to disturb anything, though the path itself seemed to invite me. Pebbles crunched softly beneath my boots, winding between beds of flowers that ignored calendars and logic. I crouched near a patch of violets. Their scent was faint but sweet, and for a moment I thought of my grandmother's hands, the way they smelled after tending her tiny balcony garden, mixing soil and sunlight into a perfume only she carried. The memory settled over me like a shawl, warming and aching at the same time. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. It wasn't silence, exactly, more like the hush of a library or a church, where sound softened out of respect. Even the city's relentless heartbeat, car horns, chatter, the hiss of buses, had been pushed to the edges of my awareness. That's when I noticed the bench. It was stone, weathered but unbroken, and positioned exactly where the path curved into a clearing. Sunlight fell over it like a spotlight, illuminating its surface. I hesitated before sitting, afraid it might collapse, but it held me firmly, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. From that vantage, the garden stretched out like a painting. Trees arched high, their branches interlacing like fingers in prayer. Flowers pooled in colors so rich they seemed painted onto the earth itself. And in the distance, I thought I saw movement. A figure stooped over a cluster of blooms. My chest tightened. I wasn't alone. For a heartbeat, I considered leaving, slipping back through the gate before anyone could see me. But my curiosity pressed harder than my fear. I rose from the bench and followed the curve of the path, each step measured, my breath shallow. As I drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman. Older, her back bent with age, but her hands steady as they worked the soil. She wore a faded straw hat and gloves that looked older than me, their edges frayed but functional. "Hello?" I called softly, almost whispering, as though afraid my voice might shatter the enchantment. She didn't startle. She looked up slowly, eyes pale blue and clear despite the creases that framed them. A smile spread across her lips, one that felt as though she already knew me. "You found it," she said simply. Her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had waited a long time. I blinked. I didn't mean to intrude. The gate was open, and her smile deepened, kind rather than sharp. "The gate doesn't open for everyone." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. My throat tightened, but I managed a nervous laugh. "Well, I suppose I should be flattered then." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she patted the soil gently, almost reverently, before slipping off her gloves. Her hands were lined, strong, carrying the story of years. She gestured to the bench behind me. "Sit. Rest. Gardens aren't meant for rushing." I obeyed, without quite understanding why. Something about her tone, the weight of her presence, made it impossible to refuse. She studied me for a moment, her gaze neither invasive nor casual, as though she was reading something written between my words, between my movements. "You look tired," she said softly, not in the judgmental way, but with a compassion that pierced deeper than I wanted. I opened my mouth to deflect, to deny, but the truth pressed harder. "I am." She nodded, as though this answer was expected. "Then you came to the right place." The garden seemed to hum in agreement, the leaves shivering under a breeze I hadn't felt a moment earlier. I glanced around, feeling both unsettled and comforted.
How is this possible? I asked finally, my voice hushed. All of this? It shouldn't exist here, not in the middle of the city. The woman's eyes crinkled at the corners as she tilted her head. Not everything follows the city's rules. Some things survive because they must. Some things bloom because someone believes they can. Her words sank into me, unsettling and soothing all at once. I looked back at the gate, hidden now by the arch of trees, and wondered if I would even find it again.
Some things bloom because someone believes they can, she had said, and the words kept ringing in the bright hush between us. The woman straightened slowly, brushed soil from her palms, and slipped the frayed gloves into the back pocket of her faded apron. Up close, I could see the fine green dust caught in the threads, the way gardeners carry their work like pollen. "I'm Selene," I offered at last, voice low, unsure why I felt I should whisper in a place built on whispering. She nodded, as if I'd confirmed a fact she already knew. "Sit a moment," she said, and moved toward the bench with the measured grace of someone who has learned to walk with time instead of against it. I followed, the path bending past rose canes and a bed of calendula blazing like small suns. The scent was earth and rain and something sweet I couldn't name. "People think gardens are quiet," she went on, lowering herself to the bench, "but they speak, if you'll let them." She inclined her head toward the trees. "Hear it?" I listened, really listened, until the layers separated, leaves conversing in small applause, bees making soft arithmetic from flower to flower, a distant trickle of water I hadn't noticed before. The city was still out there, a vague thunder at the edges, but here the sounds arranged themselves differently, as if they belonged to a gentler clock. "Why was the gate open?" I asked. "I've walked past for years. It was always locked." "It opens," she said, "when someone has something honest to put down." She didn't look at me when she said it. She watched a ladybug navigate the ridge of her knuckle, as if the answer were for the insect, not me. I let the sentence find its way into my chest. "And if someone has nothing to put down?" She smiled. "Then the gate looks like iron again." We sat without speaking. A breeze came soft as breath, lifting the edges of my hair. The bench stone was cool through my jeans, and I realized my shoulders had fallen from their habitual brace toward my ears. I hadn't even noticed the letting go. She said after a while, "I don't pry. That's one of the rules here. You bring what you bring, you leave what you leave. The garden doesn't need the story to do its part." "What is its part? What does it do?" She considered. "It receives, and it returns. Not in the same shape, not on demand." A dry twig snapped under a bird somewhere to our left. She added, almost to herself, "It reminds people that not everything worth keeping lives in our hands." I thought of the week that had wrung me out, expectations like polite shackles, conversations with sharp little teeth hidden in them. "I don't even know where to begin," I admitted. "It's not one thing, it's a pile of small heavies." "The small ones make the tallest stacks," she said lightly, eyes bright with humor that didn't mock. "Here," she reached into her apron and brought out a small tin the size of a biscuit. Inside lay a stack of pale slips, paper thin and translucent, as well as a stubby pencil and a smooth river stone. "Write one," she said. "Only one for today. One word, if you can. Name a weight you can carry to the gate on your way out. My throat tightened. Now? Or later, she tucked a stray leaf from the bench into her palm and set the tin between us. The act of naming is already a loosening. I stared at the paper. It looked like nothing, like the skin of an onion, the kind you brush away without noticing. But my chest knew better. Words have heft. The right ones, even more. Why me? I asked, surprising myself. Why do I get to be here? The same reason anyone does, she said, turning her face toward the light. Because you looked up at the right moment. Because you didn't talk yourself out of wonder. A pause. Because you were brave enough to stop. I laughed softly, unsure whether to be proud or embarrassed. It didn't feel brave. It rarely does from the inside. A wren dropped into the path ahead of us, cocked its head as if assessing our eligibility, and disappeared into the thyme. The woman rose with a little sound, half sigh, half satisfaction, and gestured for me to follow. I want to show you something. We walked to a narrow rill cut from stone, where water threaded its way in a clear ribbon between fern and moss. She knelt, carefully, knees finding the spot worn by many knees, and dipped her fingers. Cold keeps things honest, she murmured, then turned her palm upward, so droplets trembled there like tiny mirrors. When you're ready, you'll place your paper here. The water does the rest. It dissolves? I asked, imagining ink feathering into the stream. It changes state, she corrected gently. Like grief when it's witnessed, like fear when it's spoken. You'll still have your life, but the weight, she lifted her wet hand, it learns a different gravity. I didn't know if I believed in dissolving paper or revised gravities, but the steadiness in her voice pressed against my skepticism until it softened. I nodded. We walked back toward the bench. She moved more slowly than I did, but she always arrived first somehow, a person timed exactly to her own breath. I wanted to ask her 100 things. Who built the gate? Whether anyone else came, how seasons could collide so unapologetically here. But the questions felt greedy. The garden made me want to earn answers. Will I find the gate again, or does it only open once? She said, it opens as often as you show up true. Some people come every day for a week and never again. Some come once a season. Some only when the sky is the color of forgiveness. She smiled at my puzzled look. You'll know it when you see it. I took the tin, the pencil, the stone. The river hissed somewhere behind us like a careful secret. I thought of what single word could hold a piece of the pile I carried. Obligation, apology, permission. I closed my eyes and a quieter word floated up, one I hadn't realized I was avoiding. Prove. I whispered. The woman did not ask me to explain. She only inclined her head, as if the garden had nodded. When I stood to leave, the light had shifted, warmer, lower, folding gold into the leaves. At the edge of the clearing, I looked back. The woman was already kneeling in the beds again, her hands moving with the patient competence of tide and season. Thank you, I called. She didn't turn, but I saw the smile in the angle of her shoulders. Till soon, she said. I found the path by listening more than looking, as if the stones themselves sang direction. The gate appeared where the trees opened their hands, no longer ajar, but not forbidding either.
I slipped the tin into my coat pocket, paper whispering like a promise. "See you tomorrow, Selene," the woman called. I stopped with my palm on the iron. She hadn't told me my name.
That night, I dreamed of the garden. The colors were sharper than anything I'd seen in waking life, each petal burning with impossible clarity. When I woke, the memory clung to me, like the scent of blossoms on clothing after summer rain. I couldn't decide if it comforted me or unsettled me. All day at work, I caught myself staring at blank pages, my mind wandering back to the locked gate, to the woman who somehow knew my name, to the slip of paper still tucked in my coat pocket, waiting for me to write a single word. By late afternoon, resistance collapsed. My feet carried me to the same street as if guided by invisible string. And there it was, the gate. Unremarkable, vines climbing higher now as if to mask its presence. I expected it to be locked again, but when I pressed gently, it yielded without protest. Inside, the air changed instantly. The garden greeted me with that same impossible collision of seasons. Tulips alongside late roses, violets daring the early chill. The hush enfolded me, pulling away the grit of the city, and I breathed easier than I had in weeks. She was there, of course, bent over a bed of herbs, her straw hat shading her face. She looked up before I even called out, and again, her smile had that uncanny quality, as if she were greeting someone expected. "You came back," she said simply. I wasn't sure if I should. Her laughter was soft, like a wind chime caught in a gentle draft. Places like this don't survive on certainty. They survive on the courage to return. I slipped my hand into my coat and touched the folded slip of paper. "You gave me this. You said to write one word. And did you?" "Not yet," my voice caught. "I couldn't choose." She nodded, neither disappointed nor surprised. "Then perhaps you weren't ready to let any part of it go. That's fine. Most people need time." I followed her along the path until we came to a small pond tucked beneath the arch of a willow. The surface shimmered with scattered petals, pink and white, drifting like fragments of a letter never delivered. The woman sat on a stone by the water and gestured for me to join her. Every garden has two halves: the part you can see, flowers, trees, blooms, and the part you can't, roots, earth, the hidden work that makes the rest possible. People are much the same. Most of us carry far more beneath the surface than anyone will ever witness. Her words landed like stones sinking into my chest. I thought of all the things I carried, the expectations, the doubts, the unanswered questions I kept shoving into corners of myself. "What if the hidden part is too heavy?" I asked. "Then you find places like this, places that can hold the weight with you, not instead of you, with you." The willow's branches swayed, brushing the pond. I leaned forward, watching the petals drift. "I don't know if I believe in places like this, or people like this." She smiled gently. "Belief is just the first root. Action is the water." We sat in silence. I closed my eyes and listened to the rustle of leaves, to the low hum of bees, to the faint rush of water from the reel. Slowly, the noise inside me began to quiet. When I opened my eyes again, the woman had already risen, moving back toward the heart of the garden. She glanced over her shoulder, her blue eyes bright beneath the brim of her hat. "Bring your word tomorrow. One
is enough to begin. I wanted to ask how she was so sure I'd return, but she had already turned away, her hands reaching once more for the soil. The path led me back to the gate, where the vines seemed heavier than before, their leaves trembling in the waning light. As I slipped through, I felt a shift, subtle, the undeniable, as if the garden itself had pressed something into my palm. When I reached home and emptied my pockets, I found it. A single violet petal, soft as silk, resting atop the folded slip of paper.
The next morning, I woke with the scent of violets clinging to my pillow. It startled me. My apartment had no flowers, no perfumes, nothing that could have left such a trace. I sat up, pressed my face into the fabric, and breathed in again. The sweetness was faint, but undeniable. I searched the kitchen, half expecting to find the glass with the petals still there, but I'd tossed it before bed. The counter was clean. Only the folded slip of paper remained, tucked beside the kettle, waiting for a word I still hadn't written. At work, the garden followed me. Not literally, but in impressions. A colleague leaned in to ask a question, and I caught a whiff of damp soil. Passing the office window, I thought I saw petals fluttering outside, though the street below was bare. Even the hum of the photocopier carried a rhythm I recognized, like the water threading through the rill in the garden. By the time I left the building, the ache to return had rooted itself in me. I walked with quick steps, telling myself I was only curious, that I didn't believe in magic gardens or strangers who knew my name. But when I reached the street, the gate was different. It was locked again. The padlock hung heavy, rest glinting faintly in the streetlight. The vines seemed thicker than before, their leaves wrapped tightly around the bars as though the garden had pulled a curtain. I pressed my hand against the iron. Cold seeped into my skin, deeper than the chill of evening. I whispered without meaning to. Nothing moved. I stayed there for minutes, long enough for people to pass and glance at me curiously. To them, I was just a woman staring at a gate to nowhere. I almost laughed at myself, at the absurdity of begging metal to open. But something in me ached, as though I'd lost a place I'd known all my life without realizing it. At home, I tried to bury the longing in small rituals. Tea, a hot shower, folding laundry. But when I slid into bed, a violet petal slipped from the pocket of my jeans and landed on the floor. My heart stuttered. I hadn't put it there. I picked it up carefully. Its edges were still soft, as though freshly fallen. When I held it between my fingers, I could smell the garden again. Warm earth and wild bloom. I placed it on the folded slip of paper and lay awake staring at it until dawn. The next day, I passed the gate again, still locked, but there, caught in the ironwork, was another petal. White this time, like a sliver of moonlight pressed into metal. I reached out, and it crumbled softly into my palm. The woman's words returned to me. The gate opens as often as you show up true. I stood there, my hand full of fragile white dust, and wondered what truth I was still refusing to bring. That night, I finally unfolded the slip of paper and held the stubby pencil above it. The silence of my apartment felt sharper than any noise. What single word could I give? What weight could I name? I thought of responsibility, of loneliness, of the endless need to prove, but none of those felt like the core. My chest tightened and another word surfaced, quiet but insistent. Fear. My hand shook as I wrote it down. The letters were small, almost apologetic, but the moment the pencil left the page, something in me loosened, as though a thread had been cut.
I folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the petal on the counter. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would try again. Sleep came easier that night, and when it did, I dreamed not of work or family or deadlines, but of the garden's willow tree, its branches bending low, whispering secrets only the roots understood.
The slip of paper felt heavier in my pocket than its weight should have allowed. All morning, I touched it again and again, as if to confirm it hadn't vanished. One word, written in shaky pencil: fear. It seemed absurd that such a small thing could change the way I walked through the city, but it did. Every step toward the hidden street felt deliberate, like a vow. When I reached the gate, my breath caught, locked again. The padlock sat stubborn and familiar, vines hugging tighter than before. For a moment, I thought that I had been foolish, that the garden had been nothing more than a dream I wanted too much to believe. But then, as I laid my palm against the iron, I felt warmth. Not the cold bite of metal, but a slow, steady warmth that spread up my arm. The lock gave a quiet click, almost shy, and the gate shifted inward just enough for me to slip through. Inside, the garden breathed. The air was thicker, fragrant with blossoms that hadn't been there before. The willow seemed greener, its branches hanging like curtains of silk. Bees threaded the air in neat, invisible patterns. And there, kneeling by the rill of water, was the woman in the straw hat. She looked up as if she'd been expecting me all along. "You've brought it." I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the folded paper. "Yes." She didn't reach for it. She only nodded toward the stream. "Then give it to the water." My feet moved before my doubts could argue. The stones beneath my boots were cool, slick with moss. And when I knelt, I felt the same hush I'd noticed on my first visit. A quiet, not of absence, but of attention. The garden seemed to lean closer, listening. I held the paper above the water, my hand trembling. It felt wrong to release it, wrong to let any part of myself float away. And yet the weight inside me screamed for relief. Slowly, I opened my fingers. The slip landed softly, bobbing once before the water pulled it downstream. Ink bled immediately, the word fear feathering into threads of gray that curled and vanished. Within moments, the page itself thinned, softened, and melted into the current. The woman's voice was gentle. "The river doesn't erase. It transforms." I stared until nothing remained but ripples. My chest felt strange. Lighter, yes, but also hollow, as though I had left a rib behind. "Will it come back, the fear?" She touched the water with the tips of her fingers. "Of course. Fear is human, but now it knows it has somewhere to go." I sank back onto my heels, tears stinging my eyes, though I couldn't name why. It wasn't grief exactly, more like release. "You see," she said, smiling softly, "one word is enough to begin." I wiped at my face, embarrassed, but she didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she did and chose kindness over comment. She rose slowly, brushing her knees, and extended her hand to help me stand. Her grip was firm, grounding, like tree roots through stone. Together we walked along the path. The flowers seemed brighter, their colors leaning toward me as if acknowledging what I had given. Even the air moved differently, crisp but generous, folding around me instead of pressing in. At the clearing, she paused. "You'll come again," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. "I don't know when," I admitted. "Tomorrow or next year. It doesn't matter. The gate listens." Her words lingered as I left. This time, when the iron swung shut behind me, it did so with a sound almost like a sigh. Not final, but patient. On the street, the city greeted me with its usual chaos, horns blaring, vendors calling, the sharp tang of exhaust. Yet beneath it, I carried something else.
The memory of ink dissolving into water, and the feeling that maybe, for the first time in months, I wasn't carrying everything alone. That night when I undressed, I thought a faint streak of green on my palm where I had touched the willow's branch. No matter how many times I washed, it stayed until morning, like the garden wanted me to remember. You belong here now.
The next days blurred into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Work, errands, conversations with people who asked the same old questions, all of it threaded through with a secret pulse. The knowledge that behind a set of old iron bars, a different world waited. I didn't go back immediately. Part of me feared that returning too soon would make it vanish, like a dream poked too hard. But the garden refused to stay contained. Violets appeared in impossible places. On the pavement outside my apartment, in the gutter by the bus stop. Once, I opened my bag at work and found a single petal resting on top of my notebook, as though carried there by invisible wind. By the third night, the tug became unbearable. I returned at dusk. The gate was locked, but the padlock opened beneath my touch like a heartbeat yielding. Inside, the garden glowed, literally glowed. Fireflies traced soft geometry in the shadows, and moonlight filtered through leaves in silver threads. The willow bent lower, its branches shimmering as if each leaf held a secret flame. The woman was waiting, sitting on the stone bench. This time, she didn't greet me with a smile. Instead, her gaze was solemn, like a teacher about to speak of something heavier than lessons. "You've given one word," she said. "But the garden isn't just for release. It also chooses." I frowned. "Chooses?" She gestured for me to sit. I did, the stone cool beneath me. Everyone who enters thinks they come for their own reasons, to let go, to rest, to find beauty. But the garden has its own voice. Sometimes it calls people who are meant to carry something out with them. A shiver ran through me. Carry what? She studied me for a long moment before answering. What others left behind. The silence stretched, filled only by the murmur of the rill. My pulse hammered in my ears. I thought of the word I had released, fear dissolving into water, and wondered what fragments of other people's words flowed there too. "I didn't ask for that," I whispered. "No one does," she said gently. "But the garden doesn't open by accident. If you found your way here, it means you have room to hold more than your own story." The air felt heavier suddenly, fragrant but edged with something metallic, like rain before a storm. My hands curled in my lap, cold despite the warmth of the night. "What if I don't want to?" I asked. Her smile returned, faint but steady. "Then the garden waits. It never forces, but it never forgets either." A gust of wind shook the trees, scattering petals across the path. They landed in my hair, on my hands, soft as snowfall. I brushed them away, but one clung stubbornly to my palm. Its color was darker than the rest. Not violet, not rose, but almost black, shimmering faintly like ink. I stared at it, uneased crawling under my skin. "What does this mean?" Her eyes softened. "It means the garden has chosen you." The petal pulsed once against my skin, faint as a heartbeat. I nearly dropped it, but some instinct told me to hold on. "You'll understand in time," she said quietly. "But remember, when the garden gives, it expects you to carry with care." I closed my fingers around the strange petal. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of something vast and unfinished. For the first time, the garden didn't feel only like a sanctuary.
It felt like responsibility. And in the stillness that followed, I realized this secret place was no longer just mine. It had claimed me as much as I had claimed it.
The black petal remained in my pocket all night. I tried to put it on the counter, in the shoebox where I had hidden old photographs, even between the pages of a book. Each time when I reached into my coat or jeans, it was there again, soft against my fingertips, like a reminder that refused to be ignored. By morning, I stopped fighting. I carried it with me to the office, tucked inside the lining of my notebook. That day, something strange happened. A colleague, Enna, the kind who always seemed polished to perfection, lingered by my desk. She asked a question about a report, but her voice cracked halfway through. I looked up startled and saw her eyes were glassy, her smile faltering. It wasn't the question she wanted to ask. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and touched the petal. Warmth surged through my hand, steady and undeniable. And then, as if some invisible thread had been pulled, Anna spoke again. "My father's sick," she whispered too softly for anyone else to hear. "I haven't told anyone here. I don't know how to carry it." The words tumbled out of her as though a dam had cracked. My chest tightened. She had never confided in me before. We were friendly, but not close. And yet, in that moment, she looked at me like someone who expected me to understand. I didn't give advice. I didn't need to. I only listened, nodding, letting the silence hold her words the way the garden had held mine. When she finished, she exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for days. "Thank you," she said, blinking quickly as if embarrassed. "I don't know why I told you that." Her words echoed long after she left. I touched the petal again. It was cool now, resting quietly, as if it had completed a task. That evening, I walked by the gate, locked, vines heavy, shadows pooling beneath them. But I didn't feel shut out. Not exactly. I felt connected, as if part of the garden had followed me out and would know when to call me back. At home, I placed the petal on the slip of paper where the word fear had once been written. They looked odd together, one dissolving memory, one new and inexplicable. Sleep brought dreams again. The willow bent low, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. In its branches hung dozens of petals, each glowing faintly like lanterns. Some bright, some pale, some dark as ink. They swayed gently, and I knew each one belonged to someone, somewhere. Stories waiting to be carried. I woke with my heart racing, the dream clinging like dew. The next day, the pattern repeated. A stranger on the subway sat beside me and sighed, shoulders heavy. Before I could look away, she began speaking, telling me about a fight with her daughter, about words she regretted but couldn't take back. She didn't seem to notice her own strangeness, confiding in someone she'd never see again. The petal warmed against my palm. I listened until her stop came. She left without a goodbye, lighter somehow, as though she'd set something down between us. I stared at the empty seat, shaken. The garden hadn't just given me a gift. It had given me a burden, one that demanded presence, patience, silence. That night, when I returned to the gate, the lock opened as soon as I touched it. The woman was waiting, kneeling in the soil. She looked up with knowing eyes. "It's begun," she said. I crouched beside her, the petal pressed between my fingers. "Why me?" She said, "Because you listened. Most people hear only themselves. You listened long enough for the garden to trust you." Her words filled me with both pride and unease. I didn't know if I wanted to be trusted with this.
I didn't know if I could. But when I looked around at the flowers blooming out of season, at the willow guarding its whispered secrets, at the impossible peace of the place, I realized I had already stepped too far in to turn back. The garden had chosen, and part of me had chosen too.
The next time I stood at the gate, the street behind me felt further away than usual, as though the city had pulled back to let me decide. The padlock clicked open before I even touched it, vines shifting slightly like curtains being drawn aside. Inside, the garden was alive in a way that startled me. Colors deeper, air thicker, the hum of bees almost symphonic. The willow's branches hung lower, sweeping the ground like arms reaching for an embrace. The woman waited near the stream. She didn't rise when she saw me. She simply inclined her head, as though acknowledging that I had finally arrived at a moment long overdue. "You've carried enough now. It's time to return." I frowned, confused. Return what? She gestured toward the petal in my hand. The black shimmer had dulled to gray over the past few days, but it still pulsed faintly, stubborn in its presence. "It doesn't belong to you," she said. "It belongs to the garden. You listened, you carried, and now you must release." My chest tightened. The thought of letting it go filled me with unease. "And if I don't?" "Then it will stay," she said simply, "and it will weigh you down until you forget what parts were yours and what parts were not." I closed my fist around the petal. Images rushed into me. Anna at her desk, whispering about her father, the stranger on the train confessing her regret, their voices, their grief, their words, heavy, intimate, uninvited yet entrusted. The petal had absorbed them, and somehow so had I. "I don't know if I can let it go," I admitted. The woman's eyes softened. "You don't have to know. You only have to try." We walked to the rill together. The water moved briskly today, flashing silver in the light. I knelt, the stone cool against my knees, and held the petal above the current. My hand shook. The garden hushed, as if every leaf and root were waiting. When I opened my fingers, the petal fell. For a breathless moment, it floated, darker than the water around it. Then it began to dissolve, threads of gray unwinding into silver, curling away until nothing remained. The current carried the fragments out of sight. The weight in my chest shifted, not vanished, but altered, as though what I carried had stretched its roots into the soil instead of into me. My shoulders sagged, relief and exhaustion washing through me at once. The woman touched my arm. "That is what it means to carry with care. You don't keep it, you guide it." I looked up at her, tears pricking my eyes. "And if it comes back?" She smiled faintly. "Then you'll know the path, and the gate will know you." We walked back along the path slowly, flowers bowing slightly as we passed. At the clearing, she stopped and placed something small in my hand. It was a seed, pale, unassuming, so light I barely felt it. "What's this?" I asked. "This is your return," she said. "You've given away fear, you've carried grief for others. Now you take this, plant it where you choose. It will remind you that not all burdens end heavy. Some end in bloom." The seed glowed faintly in the slant of evening sun. My throat
tightened, a knot of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," I whispered. The woman inclined her head, her smile both kind and distant, as if she knew more than she would ever say. When I stepped back through the gate, the city's noise rushed around me again. Horns, footsteps, laughter. But in my palm, the seed seemed to hum, small and steady, as though carrying with it the memory of silence. That night, I placed it on my windowsill. Outside, the city lights glittered like restless stars, but inside my apartment, one tiny seed held a promise greater than all of them.
I kept the seed on my windowsill for 3 days before I dared to touch it again. In the rush of ordinary life, it seemed absurd. A small, pale thing against the backdrop of deadlines, groceries, and unanswered emails. And yet, every time I glanced at it, my chest loosened, as though the seed carried not just possibility, but proof. Proof that I had walked through a gate no map could show. Proof that I had been changed. On the 4th morning, I cupped it in my palm and stepped outside. The city was already alive. Children in bright jackets skipping toward school, shopkeepers pulling up shutters, buses growling their way through traffic. But for me, the day moved with a quieter rhythm. The seed seemed to hum faintly, guiding me. I didn't have a garden of my own. My balcony was too small, crowded with forgotten chairs and a single stubborn rosemary plant that never seemed to thrive. Still, something told me it was enough. I filled a pot with soil, dark and damp, and pressed the seed into its center. My fingers lingered there, brushing away the excess, tucking it in as though putting a child to bed. The moment I watered it, the air shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. The city sounds dimmed, my pulse steadied, and I knew the garden had reached across its boundary to touch me here. Every morning after, I checked the pot. At first, nothing, then the faintest curl of green, fragile as breath. Day by day, it grew. Not quickly, but steadily, a quiet defiance against the concrete world around it. And with each inch it rose, something in me straightened too. I answered emails with less hesitation. I called my mother and spoke without bracing for disappointment. I met a colleague's eyes and listened, really listened, without fear of being consumed. The woman's words echoed often. Some things bloom because someone believes they can. Weeks passed. The plant, mine now, though it belonged to the garden still, unfurled leaves that glowed faintly at dusk, as if they remembered moonlight even when the sun was gone. Neighbors noticed. One asked what kind it was. I only smiled and said, "A gift." And in a way, that was the truest answer. One evening, as I watered it, I thought I heard something, faint, like the rustle of willow branches bending low. I froze, water cans suspended, and the sound came again, not from outside, not from the street, but from within the leaves themselves. A whisper I couldn't quite decipher. The plant trembled, though the air in my apartment was still, and I knew without question that the gate hadn't closed behind me forever. It had only shifted, leaving a piece of itself here with me. I touched the leaves gently, and for the first time in months, I felt no weight on my shoulders. Only a calm resolve, the kind that grows from roots unseen. The garden had given me a secret, and now I carried it into the world. And as I stood there, the leaves glowing faintly in the dim light, I realized some doors never stay closed once you found the courage to walk through them.